Chapter 22 Jonathan Harker's Journal 3rd October. As I must do something or go mad, I write this diary. It is now 6 o'clock, and we are to meet in the study in half an hour and take something to eat. For Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Seward are agreed that if we do not eat, we cannot work our best. Our best will be, God knows, required today. I must keep writing at every chance, for I dare not stop to think. All, big and little, must go down. Perhaps at the end of this, all things may teach us the most. The teaching, big or little, could not have landed Mina or me anywhere worse than we are today. However, we must trust and hope. Poor Mina told me just now, with the tears running down her dear cheeks, that it is in trouble and trial that our faith is tested, that we must keep on trusting, and that God will aid us up in the end. The end. Oh my God, the end. What end? To work. To work! When Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Seward had come back from seeing poor Renfield, we went gravely into what was to be done. First, Dr. Seward told us that when he and Dr. Van Helsing had gone down to the room below, they had found Renfield lying on the floor, all in a heap. His face was all bruised and crushed in, and the bones of his neck were broken. Dr. Seward asked the attendant who was on duty in the passage if he had heard anything. He said that he had been sitting down. He confessed to half dozing, when he heard loud noises in the room, and then Renfield had called out several times loudly, "God! God! God!" After that, there was a sound of falling, and then when he entered the room, he found him lying on the floor, face down, just as the doctors had seen him. Van Helsing asked if he had heard voices or a voice, and he said that he could not say, that at first it seemed to him as if there were two, but then there was no one in the room. It could have been only one. He could swear to it, if required, that the word God had been spoken by the patient. Dr. Seward said to us, when we were alone, that he did not wish to go into the matter. The question of an inquest had to be considered, and it would never do to be put forth in the truth, and no one would believe it. As it was, he thought that on the attendant's evidence he could give a certificate of death by misadventure and falling from the bed, and in case the coroner should demand it, there would be a formal inquest, necessarily to the same result. When the question began to be discussed as to what would be our next step, the very first thing we decided was that Mina should be in full confidence, that nothing of any sort, no matter how painful, should be kept from her. She herself agreed as to its wisdom, and it was pitiful to see her so brave and yet so sorrowful, and in such a depth of despair. "There must be no more concealment," she said. "Alas, we have had too much already, and besides, there is nothing in all the world that can give me more pain than I have already endured. Let us suffer now. Whatever may happen, it must be of new hope and new courage to me." Van Helsing was looking at her fixedly as she spoke, and said suddenly, but quietly, "But, dear Madam Mina, are you not afraid, not for yourself, but for the others from yourself, after what has happened?" Her face grew quite set in its lines, but her eyes shone with the devotion of a martyr as she answered, "Oh no, for my mind is made up." "To what?" he asked gently, whilst we were still very still. For each, in our own way, we had a sort of vague idea of what she meant. The answer came with simple, direct simplicity, as though we were simply stating a fact. "Because I find in myself, and I shall watch keenly for it, a sign of harm to any that I love, I shall die." "Would you not kill yourself?" he asked hoarsely. "I would, if there were no friend who loved me, who would save me from such a pain and so desperate an effort." She looked at him meaningly as she spoke. He was sitting down, but now he rose and came close to her and put his hand on her head and said solemnly, "My child, there is not such as one if were for your good. For myself, I could hold it in my account with God to find such euthanasia for you, even at this moment, if it were best. Nay, were it safe. But my child—" For a moment he seemed to choke, and a great sob rose to his throat, and he gulped it down and went on. "There is here some who would stand between you and death. You must not die. You must not die by any hand, but least of all your own. Until the other, who has fouled your sweet life, is true dead, you must not die. For if he is still with it, the quick undead, your death would make you even as he is. No, you must live. You must struggle and strive to live, though death would seem a boon unspeakable. You must fight death himself, though he come to you in pain or in joy, by the day or by the night, in safety or in peril. In your living soul I charge you that you do not die, nay, nor think of death, till this great evil be past." The poor deer grew white as death, and shook and shivered, as I have seen in the quick shake sand and shiver of the incoming of the tide. We were all silent. We could do nothing. At length she grew more calm, and turning to him said, sweetly, but oh, so sorrowfully as she held out her hand, "I promise you, my friend, that if God will let me live, I shall strive to do so, till, if it may be in his good name, this horror may have passed away from me." She was so good and brave that we all felt that our hearts were strengthened to work and endure for her, and we began papers in the safe, and all the papers and diaries and photographs we might use hereafter, and was to keep the record as she had done before. She was pleased with the prospect of anything to do, if pleased could be used in connection with so grim an interest. As usual, Van Helsing again had thought ahead of everyone else, and was prepared with an exact ordering of our work. "It is perhaps well," he said, "that our meeting after our visits to Carfax, we decided not to do anything with the earth boxes that lay there. Had we done so, the Count must have guessed our purpose, and would doubtless have taken measures in advance to frustrate such an effort with regard to the others. But now he does not know our intentions. Nay, more, in all probability he does not know that such a power exists to us that can sterilize his lairs, so that he cannot use them as of old. We are now much further advanced in our knowledge as to their disposition, that when we have examined the houses in Piccadilly we may track the very last of them. Today, then, is ours, and it tests our hope. The sun that rose on our sorrow this morning guards us as its course. Until it sets tonight, that monster must retain whatever form he now has. He is confined within these limitations by his earthly envelope. He cannot melt into thin air nor disappear through cracks or chinks and crannies. If he go through a doorway, he must open the door like a mortal. And so we have this day to hunt out all his lairs and sterilize them. So we shall, if we have not yet catch him and destroy him, drive him to bay in some place where the catching and destroying shall be, in time, sure." Here I started up, for I could not contain myself at the thought that the minutes and seconds so preciously laden with Mina's life and happiness were flying from us, since whilst we talked action was possible. But Van Helsing held up his hand warningly. "Nay, friend Jonathan," he said, In this, the quickest way home is the longest way, so your proverbs say. We shall act, and act with desperate quick when the time has come. But think, in all probable, the key of the situation is that house in Piccadilly. The Count may have many houses which he has bought. Of them we will have the deeds of purchase, keys, and other things. Yes, he is. He really is a great character. He will have paper that he write on. He will have his book of checks. There are many belongings that he must have somewhere. Why not in this place so central, so quiet, where he come and go by the front and the back of the door, when in the very vast of the traffic there is none to notice? We shall go there and search that house, and when we learn what it holds, then we do what our friend Arthur calls, in the phrases of Hunt, stop the earth. And so we run down our old fox. So, is it not? Then let us come at once, I cried. We are wasting the precious, precious time. The professor did not move, but simply said, And how are we going to get into that house in Piccadilly? Anyway, I cried, we shall break it in if we need be. And your police, where will they be, and what will they say? I was staggered, but I knew that if he wished to delay, he had a good reason for it. So I said, as quietly as I could, Don't wait more than you need to. You know, I am sure, what torture I'm in. Ah, my child, that I do. And indeed there is no wish for me to add to your anguish. But just think, what can we do until the world be at movement? And then will come our time. I have thought and thought, and it seems to me the simplest way is the best of all. Now we wish to get into the house, and we have no key. Is it not so? I nodded. Now suppose that you were, in truth, the owner of that house, and had some elements of comfort and hope. Go, my husband. God can, if he wishes it, guard me as well as anyone present. I hate switching voices in the middle of a line. So I started crying out, Then in God's name let us come at once, for we all are losing time. The Count may come to Piccadilly earlier than we think. Not so, said Van Helsing, holding up his hand. But why? I asked. Yeah. Especially going from Van Helsing. At least I'm not having to do Renfield anymore. He was killing my voice. But why? I asked. Do not forget, he said with an actual smile, that last night he banqueted heavily. Will he not sleep late? Did I forget? Shall I ever? Can any of us forget that terrible scene? Mina struggled hard to keep her brave countenance, but the pain overmastered her, and she put her hands before her face and shuddered whilst she moaned. Van Helsing had not intended to recall her frightful experience. He had simply lost sight of her and her part of the affair in his intellectual efforts. When it struck him what he had said, he was horrified at his thoughtlessness and tried to comfort her. Ah, Madam Mina, he said. Dear, dear Madam Mina, alas, that I of all who so reverence you should have said anything so forgetful. These stupid old lips of mine and this stupid old head do not deserve so. But you will forget that, will you not? He bent low beside her as he spoke, and she took his hand, and looking at him through her tears, she said hoarsely, Oh, I shall not forget, for it is well that I remember, and with it I have such memory of you and that sweet. Let's take it all together. Now you must all be going soon. Breakfast is ready, and we must all eat while we may be strong. Breakfast was a strange meal to us all. We tried to be cheerful and encourage each other, and Mina was the brightest and most cheerful of us. When it was over, Van Helsing stood up and said, "Now, dear friends, we go forth to our terrible enterprise. Are we all armed? As we were on that night when we first visited our enemy's lair, armed against ghostly as well as carnal attack?" We all assured him. "Then it is well. Now, Madam Mina, you are in any case quite safe here until sunset, and before then we shall return. If we shall return. But before we go, let me see you armed against personal attack. I have myself, since you came down, prepared your chamber by the placing of the things of which we know, so that he may not enter. Now let me guard yourself. On your forehead I touch this piece of sacred wafer in the name of the Father, the Son, and—" There was a fearful scream which almost froze our hearts to hear. As he placed the wafer on Mina's forehead, it had seared it, had burned into the flesh as though it had been a piece of white-hot metal. My poor darling's brain told her the significance of the fact as quickly as her nerves received the pain of it, and the two so overwhelmed her that it overawed her nature and had its voice in that dreadful scream. But the words to her thought came quickly. The echo of the scream had not ceased to ring in the air when there came the reaction. Then she sank on her knees on the floor in the agony of abasement. Pulling her beautiful hair over her face, as the leper of old his mantle, she wailed on. "Unclean, unclean! If the Almighty shuns my polluted flesh, I must bear this mark for shame on behind my forehead until Judgment Day." They all paused. I had thrown myself between her and the agony of helpless grief, and putting my arm around her, held her tight. For a few minutes our sorrowful hearts beat together, whilst friends around us turned away their eyes that ran tears silently. Then Van Helsing returned and said gravely, so gravely that I could not help but feeling that he was in some way inspired, and was stating things outside himself. "It may be that you have to bear the mark till God himself see fit, as he most surely shall, on the judgment day, to redress all wrongs of the earth and of his children that he has placed thereon. And oh, Madam Mina, my dear, may we who love you be there to see, when that red scar, the sign of God's knowledge of what has been, shall pass away, and leave your forehead as pure as the heart we know. For so surely as we live, that scar shall pass away when God sees right to lift the obedience of his will. Till then we bear the cross and his Son did, in obedience of his will. It may be that we are chosen instruments, his good pleasure, that we ascend to his bidding, as the others through stripes and shame, through tears and blood, through doubts and fears, and all that makes the difference between God and man." There was hope in his words, and comfort, and they made for resignation. Me and I both felt so, and simultaneously we took each of the old man's hands and bent over and kissed it. So without a word, we all knelt together, all holding hands, and swore to be true to each other. We men pledged ourselves to raise the veil of sorrow from the head of her whom, each in our own way, we loved, and we prayed for help and guidance in that terrible task which lay before us. It was time to start. I said farewell to Mina, in a parting which neither of us shall forget till our dying days, and we set out. But one thing I have made up my mind. If we find out that Mina must be a vampire in the end, then she shall not go into the unknown and terrible land alone. I suppose it is thus that in the old times one vampire meant many, just as their hideous bodies could only rest on sacred earth. So the holiest love was the recruiting instrument for the ghastly ranks. We entered Carfax without trouble, and found all the things the same as our first occasion. It was hard to believe that among us, so prosaic surroundings of neglect and dust and decay, that there was any ground for such fear as we already knew. Had not our minds been made up, and there not been terrible memories to spur us on, we could hardly have proceeded with our task. We found no papers nor any sign of use in the house, and in the old chapel the great boxes looked just as they had seen them last. Dr. Van Helsing said to us solemnly as we stood there before him, "And now, my friends, we have a duty to do here. We must sterilize this earth, so holy and sacred of memories, that he has brought from the far distant land for such fell use. He has chosen this earth because it has been holy. Thus we defeat him with his own weapon, for we make it more holy still. Thus we defeat him with his own weapon. It was sanctified to such use of man, and now we sanctify it to God." As he spoke, he took from his bag a screwdriver and a wrench, and very soon the top of one of the cases was thrown open. The earth smelled musty and close, but we did not somehow seem to mind, for our attention was concentrated on the professor. Taking from his box a piece of sacred wafer, he laid it reverently on the earth, and then shutting down the lid, he screwed it home. We aided him as he worked. One by one, we treated in the same way each of the great boxes, and left them as we had found them, to all appearance, but in each was a portion of the host. When we closed the door behind us, the professor said solemnly, "So much is already done. If it be that all the others we can be so successful, then the sunset of this evening may shine on the Madam Mina's forehead as white as ivory and with no stain." As we passed across the lawn on our way to the station to catch our train, we could see the front of the asylum. I looked eagerly, and in the window of our own room saw Mina. I waved my hand to her, and nodded to tell her that our work was successfully accomplished. She nodded in reply to show that she understood. The last I saw, she was waving her hand in farewell. It was with heavy heart that we sought the station, and just caught the train, which was steaming in as we reached the platform. I have written this on the train. Piccadilly, 12:30 o'clock. Just before we reached Fenchurch Street, Lord Godalming said to me, "Quinston and I will find a locksmith. You had better not come with us in case there should be any difficulty. For under the circumstance it wouldn't seem too bad for us to break into an empty house. But you are a solicitor, and the Incorporated Law Society might tell you that you should have known better." I demurred, as it was not my sharing any danger of the odium, but he went on, "Besides, it will attract less attention if there are not too many of us. My title will make it right with the locksmith, and with any policeman that may come along. You had better go with Jack and the professor, and stay on the Green Park, somewhere inside of the house. When you see the door opened and the smith has gone away, do you all come across. We shall be on the lookout for you, and let you in." "The advice is good," said Van Helsing. So we said no more. Godalming and the Morris went hurried off to catch a cab. We followed in another. At the corner of Arlington Street, our contingent got out and strolled to the Green Park. My heart beat as I saw the house on which so much of our hope was centered, looking up grim and silent on the deserted condition amongst its more lively and spruced-up looking neighbors. We sat down on a bench within good view, and began to smoke cigars as to hide the attention as possible. And the minutes seemed to pass with leaden feet as we waited for the coming of the others. At length we saw a four-wheeler drive up. Out of it, in leisurely fashion, got Lord Goldring and Morris, and down from the box descended a quick-set working man with his rush-woven basket of tools. Morris paid the cabman, who touched his hat and drove away. Together the two ascended the steps, and Lord Goldring pointed out the door he wanted done. The workman took off his coat leisurely and hung it on one of the spikes of the railing, saying something to the policeman, who just went then sauntering along. The policeman nodded in acquaintance, and the man kneeling down placed his handbag beside him. After searching through it, he took out a selection of tools which he proceeded to lay beside him in an orderly fashion. And then he stood up, looked at the keyhole, blew into it, and turning to his employers made some remark. Lord Goldring smiled, and the man lifted a good-sized bunch of keys and selected one of them. He began to probe the lock as if feeling his way into it. After fumbling about for a bit, he tried the second, then the third. All at once the door opened under a slight push from him, and he and the two others entered the hall. We sat still. My own cigar burnt furiously, but Van Helsing's went cold altogether. We waited patiently as we saw the workman come out and bring his bag. Then he held the door partly open, steadying it for his knees, while he lifted the key to the lock. This he finally handed to Lord Goldring, who took out his purse and gave him something. The man touched his hat, took his bag, put on his coat, and departed. Not a soul in the slightest notice took any interest in the whole transaction. When the man had fairly gone, we three crossed the street and knocked on the door. It was immediately opened by Quincy Morris, beside whom stood Lord Goldring, lighting a cigar. "This place smells vilely," said the latter as we came in. It did indeed smell vilely, like the old chapel at Carfax. And with our previous experience, it is plain to us that the Count had been using the place pretty freely. We moved to explore the house, all keeping together in case of attack, for we knew we had a strong and wily enemy to deal with, and as yet we did not know whether the Count might be in the house. In the dining room, which lay at the back of the hall, we found 8 boxes of earth. 8 boxes only out of the 9 which we sought. Our work was not over, and would never be until we found the missing box. First we opened the shutters of the window which looked out at the street and the stone-flagged yard, with the blank face of the stable pointed to look like the front of a miniature horse. There were no windows in it, so we were not afraid of being overlooked. We did not lose any time in examining the chests. With the tools which we had brought with us, we opened them one by one and treated them as we had treated those others in the old chapel. It was evident to us that the Count was not present in the house, and we proceeded to search for any of his effects. After a cursory glance at the rest of the rooms, from basement to attic, we came to the conclusion that the dining room contained any effects which might belong to the Count, and so we proceeded to minutely examine them. They lay in a sort of orderly disorder on the great dining room table. There were title deeds of the Piccadilly house in the great bundle, deeds for the purchase of houses in Mile End and Barnamy, note paper, envelopes, and a jug and basin, later containing dirty water which was reddened as if by blood. Last of all was a little heap of keys of all sorts and sizes, probably those belonging to the other houses. When we examined this last find, Lord Goldring and Quincy Morris, taking accurate notes of the various addresses of the houses in the east and south, took with them the keys in a great bunch, and set out to destroy the boxes in these places. The rest of us are, with the patience we can, waiting for the return and the coming of the Count. Chapter 23. Dr. Seward's Diary. 3rd October. The time seemed terribly long whilst we were waiting for the coming of Goldring and Quincy Morris. The professor tried to keep our minds active by using them all at the time. I could see his beneficent purpose. and by the side glances which he threw from time to time at Harker. The poor fellow was overwhelmed in a misery that is appalling to see. Last night he was a frank, happy-looking man with a strong, youthful face, full of energy, and with dark brown hair. Today he was a drawn, haggard old man, whose white hairs matched well with the hollow, burning eyes and grief-written lines of his face. His energy is still intact. In fact, he is like a living flame. This may yet be his salvation, for if all goes well it will tide him over the despairing period, for will then, in a kind of way, wake again to the realities of life. Poor fellow, I thought my own trouble was bad enough, but his... The professor knows this well enough and is doing his best to keep his mind active. What he has been saying, under the circumstances of absorbing interest, as well as I can remember, here it is. I have studied, over and over again, since they came to my hands, all the papers relating to this monster. The more I have studied, the greater seems the necessity to utterly stamp him out. Although there are signs of his advance, not only of his power, but of his knowledge of it, as I learned from the researches of my friend Arminius of Budapest, he was in life a most wonderful man. Soldier, statesman, and alchemist, which later was the highest development of the science knowledge of his time. He had a mighty brain, learned beyond compare, and a heart that knew no fear or remorse. He dared even to attend the Scholomance, and which there was no branch of knowledge of his time that he did not essay. Well, in him the brain powers survived the physical death, though it would seem that memory was not all complete. In some faculties of his mind has been, as is, only a child, but he is growing, and some things that were childish at first are now the man's in stature. He is experimenting, and doing it well, and if it had not been that we crossed the paths he may be yet, as we fail, the father or furtherer of a new order of beings, whose road must lead through death, not life. Harker groaned and said, And this is all a raid against my darling. But how is he experimenting? The knowledge may help us to defeat him. He has all along, since his coming, been trying his power, slowly but surely. That big child brain of his is working. Well, for us it is, as yet a child brain. For had he dared, at the first attempt, to attain certain things, he would long ago have not been beyond our power. However, he means to succeed, and as a man who has centuries before him can afford to wait and go slow, festima lente may well be his motto. I fail to understand, said Harker wearily. Oh, do be more plain to me. Perhaps grief and trouble are dulling my brain. The professor laid his hand tenderly on his shoulder as he spoke. Ah, my child, I will be plain. Do you not see how, of late, this monster has been creeping into knowledge experimentally? How he has been making use of the Zoophagous patient to effect his own entry into friend John's house? For your vampire, though in all afterwards he can come when he must first make entry only when asked thereto by an inmate. But these are not his most important experiments. Do we not see how, at the first, all these so great boxes were moved by others? He knew not then, but that must be so. But all the time that so great child-brain of his was growing, and began to consider whether he might not himself move the box. So he began to help, and then he found that this be all right. He tried to move them all alone. So he progress. He scatter these graves of him, but none but he know where they are hidden. He may have intended to bury them deep in the ground, so that only he use them in the night, or such time that he can change his form. They do him equal well. But none may know these are his hiding place. But, my child, do not despair. This knowledge come to him just too late. Already all of his lairs but one be sterilized for him, and before the sun sets this shall be so. Then he will have no place where he can move and hide. I delayed this morning so that we might be sure. Is there not more at stake for us than for him? Then why not be more careful than him? By my clock it is 1 hour, and already, if all be well, friend Arthur and Quincy are on their way to us. Today is our day, and we must go sure, if slow, and lose no chance. See, there are 5 of us, when those absent ones return. Whilst he was speaking, we were startled to knock at the hall door. The double postman's knock, of the telegram boy. We all moved out to the hall with one impulse, and Van Helsing, holding up his hand to us, kept silent, stepped to the door and opened it. The boy handed in a dispatch. The professor closed the door again, and after looking at the direction, opened it and read it aloud. Look out for D. He has just now, 12:45, come from Carfax Hurley and hastened toward the south. He seems to be going the round. He may want to see you. Mina. There was a pause, broken by Jonathan Harker's voice. Now, God be thanked, we shall meet soon. Van Helsing turned to him quickly and said, God will act in his own way and time. Do not fear and do not rejoice as yet, for what we wish at the moment may be our undoings. I care for nothing now, he answered hotly, except to wipe out the brutes of the face of creation. I would sell my soul to do it. Oh, hush, hush, my child, said Van Helsing. God does not purchase souls in this wise, and the devil, though he may purchase, does not keep faith. But God is merciful and just, and knows your pain and your devotion to that dear Madam Mina. Think you how her pain would be doubled, did she but hear your wild words. Do not fear any of us. We are all devoted to this cause, and today shall see the end. The time is coming for action. Today this vampire is limit to the powers of man. Until sunset he may not change. It will take him time to arrive here. See, it is 20 minutes past 1. And yet there are some times before he can come hither, be he never so quick. What we must hope for is that my Lord Arthur and Quincy arrive first. Half an hour after we had received Mr. Harker's telegram, there came a quiet, resolute knock at the hall door. It was just an ordinary knock, such as given hourly by thousands of gentlemen. But it made the professor's heart and mind beat loudly. We looked at each other and moved towards the hall. We each held ready the use of various ornaments, a spiritual in the left hand and a mortal in the right. Van Helsing pulled back the latch, and holding the door half open, stood back, having both hands ready for action. The gladness in our hearts must have shone upon our faces when, on the step, close to the door, we saw Lord Godalming and Quincy Morris. They came quickly in and closed the door behind them, the former saying that we moved down the hall. "It's all right. We found both places. 6 boxes in each, and we destroyed them all."
"Destroyed?"
said the professor. "For him." We were silent for a moment, and then Quincy said, "There's nothing to do but wait here. If, however, he doesn't turn up by 5 o'clock, we must start off. For if we don't do to leave Miss Harker alone after sunset."
"He will be here for long now," said Van Helsing, who had been consulting his pocketbook. "Nota bene. In the Madam telegram, we went south from Carfax. That means he went across the river, and he could only do so at the slack of tide, which should be something before 1 o'clock. That he went south has a meaning for us. He is only yet suspicious, and he went for Carfax first place, where he could suspect interference at least. He must have been at Bermondsey only a short time before him. That he is not here already shows that he went to Middle End next. This took him some time, for he would then have to be carried over the river in some way. Believe me, my friends, we shall not have long to wait now. We should have ready some plan of attack so that we may throw away no chance. Hush, there is no time now. Have all your arms, be ready."
He held up a warning hand as he spoke, for we all could hear a key softly inserted in the lock in the hall door. I could not but admire at such a moment the way in which the dominant spirit asserted itself. In all our hunting parties and adventures in different parts of the world, Quincy Morris had always been the one to arrange the plan of action, and Arthur and I had been accustomed to obey him implicitly. Now the old habit seemed to be renewed instinctively. With a swift glance around the room, he at once laid out our plan of attack, and, without speaking a word, with a gesture placed each of us in position. Van Helsing, Harker, and I were just behind the door so that when it opened the professor could guard it, whilst we two stepped between the incomer and the door. Bottoming behind Quincy in the front stood just out of sight, ready to move out of the window. We waited in a suspense that made a seconds pass with nightmare slowness. The slow, careful steps came along the hall. The Count was evidently prepared for some surprise. At least he feared it. Suddenly, with a single bound, he leaped into the room, winning a way past us before any of us could raise a hand to stay him. There was something so panther-like in the movement, something so unhuman, that it seemed to sober us all from the shock of his coming. The first act was Harker, who, with a quick movement, threw himself before the door leading into the room in front of the house. As the Count saw us, the horrible sort of snarl passed over his face, showing the eye teeth long and pointed, but the evil smile quickly passed into a cold stare of lion-like disdain. His expression again changed as, with a single impulse, we all advanced on him. It was a pity that we did not have some better organized plan of attack, for even at that moment I wondered what we were to do. I did not myself know whether our legal weapons would avail us anything. Hark evidently meant to try the matter, for he had already given a great curry knife, made a fierce and sudden cut at him. The blow was a powerful one. Only the diabolical quickness of Count's leap back saved him. The second lessened. The trench blade had shorn off his heart. No, let's try a sandwich. I haven't gotten that fixed yet. As it was, the point must have just cut the cloth of his coat, making a wide gap once the bundle of banknotes and the stream of gold fell out. The expression of the Count's face was so hellish that for a moment I feared for Harker, though I saw him throw the terrible knife aloft at another strike. Instinctively I moved forward, and with a protective impulse, holding the crucifix and the wafer in my left hand, I felt a mighty power fly along my arm, and it was without surprise that I saw the monster cower away before a similar movement made spontaneously by each of us. It would be impossible to describe the expression of hate and baffled malignity, of anger and hellish rage, which came over the Count's face. His waxen hue became a greenish yellow by the contrast of his burning eyes, and the red scar of his forehead showed through the pallid skin like a palpitating wound. The next instant, with a sinuous dive, he swept under Harker's arm, ere the blow would fall, and grasping a handful of the money from the floor, dashed across the room and threw himself at the window. Amid the crash and glitter of the falling glass, he stumbled into a flagged area below. Though the sound of the shattering glass, I could hear the ting of gold, and some of the sovereigns fell out on the flagging. We ran over and saw him spring unhurt from the ground. He rushing up the steps and crossed the flagged yard and pushed open the stable door. There he turned and spoke to us. "You think to baffle me? With your pale faces in a row, like sheep in a butcher's? You shall be very sorry yet, each one of you. You think you have left me without a place to rest, but I have more. My revenge has just begun. I spread it over centuries, and this time I'm by my side. Your girls that you love will all be mine already. And though them you and the others shall be mine, my creatures, to do my bidding, to be my jackals when I want to feed. Bah!" With a contemptuous sneer, he pressed through the door, and went and heard the many bolts creak as he fastened them behind. The door beyond opened and shut. The first of his no speaker was the professor. As, realizing the difficulty of following him through the stable, we moved towards the hall. "We have learned something, much. Notwithstanding his brave words, he fears us. He fears time. He fears want. For if not, why he hurries so? His very tone betray him, for my ears deceive. Why take that money? You follow quick. You are hunters of wild beasts and understand it so. For me, I make sure that nothing here be of use to him, if he so return." As he spoke, he put the money remaining into his pockets, took the title deeds and the bundle of Fitzharker, and left them, and swept the remaining things into the open fireplace, where he set fire to them with a match. Hey, Pixel Doctor. Elmering and Morris rushed into the yard, and Harker had lowered himself from the window to follow the Count. He had, however, bolted the stable door, and by the time they were forced to open it, there was no sign of him. Van Helsing had tried to make inquiry at the back of the house, but the mews was deserted, and no one had seen him depart. It was now late in the afternoon, and sunset was not far off. We had to recognize that our game was up. With heavy hearts, we agreed to the professor when he said, "Let us go back to Madame Mina. Poor, poor dear Madame Mina. All we can do now is just done, and we can there at least protect her. But we need not despair. But there's one more earth box, and we must try to find it. When that is done, all may be well." I could see that he spoke as bravely as he could to comfort Harker. Poor fellow was quite broken down. Now and again he gave a low moan which he could not suppress. He was thinking of his wife. With sad hearts we came back to my house, where we found Miss Harker waiting for us, with an appearance of cheerfulness which did not betray or honor her bravery and unselfishness. When she saw our faces, her own became as pale as death. For a second or two her eyes were closed, as if she were in secret prayer, and then she said cheerfully, "I can never thank you all enough, oh, my poor darling." As she spoke, she took her husband's gray head in her hands and kissed it. "Lay your poor head here and rest it, and all will be yet well, dear. God will protect us, and if he so will it, in his good intent." The poor fellow only groaned. There was no place for words in his sublime misery. We had a sort of perfunctory supper together, and I think it cheered us all up somewhat. It was, perhaps, the mere animal heat of food to the hungry people, for none of us had eaten anything since breakfast. or the sense of companionship which may have helped us, but anyhow we were all less miserable. And so the morrow is not altogether without hope. True to our promise, we told Miss Harker everything which had passed, and although she grew snowy white at times when danger had seemed to threaten her husband, and red at other times when his devotion to her was manifested, she listened bravely and with calmness. When we came to the part where Harker had rushed at the Count so recklessly, she clung to her husband's arm, and held it as tight as though her clinging could protect him from any harm that might come. She said nothing, however. The narration was all done, and the matters had been brought up at the right present time. Then, without letting go of her husband's hand, she stood up among us and spoke. Oh, that I could have any idea of that scene, of how sweet, sweet, good woman, and all the radiant beauty of her youth and animation, with that red scar on her forehead, of which she was conscious, and which we saw the grinding of our teeth, remembering whence and how it came, her loving kindness against our grim hate, her tender faith against all our fears and doubting. And we, knowing that, so far the symbols went, she with all her goodness and purity and faith was outcast from God. Jonathan, she said, and the words sounded like music on her lips. It was so full of love and tenderness. Jonathan, dear, and you all, true friends, I want you to bear something in mind through all this dreadful time. I know that you must fight, that you must destroy even as you destroyed the false Lucy, so that the true Lucy might live hereafter. But it is not a work of hate. That poor soul who has wrought all this misery is the saddest case of all. Just think what will be his joy, too, when he is destroyed, and his worser parts and his better part may achieve spiritual immortality. You must be pitiful to him, too, though it may not hold your hands from his destruction. As she spoke, I could see her husband's face darken and draw together, as though the passion in him were shriveling his being to its core. Instinctively, the clasp of his wife's hand grew closer until his knuckles looked white. She did not flinch from the pain which I knew she must be suffering, but looked at him with eyes that were more appealing than ever. As she stopped speaking, he leapt to his feet, almost tearing his hand from hers as he spoke. May God give him into the hand just as long enough to destroy that earthly life of him, which we are aiming at. If beyond it, I could send his soul forever and ever burning hell if I would do it. Oh, hush, in the name of good God. Don't say such things, Jonathan. My husband or you will crush me with fear and horror. Just think, my dear, I've been thinking this all day long, and that perhaps some day I too may need such pity, and that others like you, and with equal cause for anger, may deny it to me. Oh, my dear husband, my husband, indeed I would have spared you such a thought had there been another way. But I pray that God may not have treasured your wild words, except as the heartbroken wail of a very loving and sorely stricken man. Oh God, let these poor white hairs go in evidence of what he has suffered, who all his life has done so wrong, and whom not so many sorrows have come. We men were all in tears now. There was no resisting them, and we wept openly. She wept too, to see that her sweeter counsels had prevailed. Her husband flung himself on his knees beside her, and putting his arms around her, hid his face in the folds of her dress. Van Helsing beckoned us, and we stole out of the room, leaving the two loving hearts alone with God. Before they retired, the professor fixed up the room against the coming of the vampire, and assured Mrs. Harker that she might rest in peace. She tried to school herself to the belief, and manifested, for her husband's sake, tried to seem content. It was a brave struggle, and was, I think and believe, without not without its reward. Van Helsing had placed at my hand a bell with either of them was so sound in case of an emergency. When they had retired, Quincy, Godalming, and I arranged that we would sit up, dividing the night between us, and watch over the safety of this poor stricken lady. The first watch falls to Quincy, so the rest of us will be off his bed as soon as we can. Godalming has already turned in, and for his is the second watch. Now that my work is done, I, too, shall go to bed. Jonathan Harker's Journal, 3rd to 4th October, close to midnight. I thought yesterday would never end. There was over me a yearning for sleep and some sort of blind belief that to wake would be to find things changed, and that any change must now be for the better. Before we parted, we discussed what our next step was to be, but we could not arrive at no result. All we knew was that one earthen box remained, and that the Count alone knew where it was. If he chose to lie hidden, he may baffle us for years. And in the meantime, that thought was too terrible. I dare not think of it even now. This I know, that if ever there was a woman who was all perfection, that one is my poor wronged darling. I love her 1,000 times more for her sweet pity of last night. A pity that made my own hate of the monster seem despicable. Surely God will not permit the world to go be the poorer for the loss of this creature. This is hope to me. We are all drifting reefwards now, and our faith is our only anchor. Thank God Mina is asleep, and sleeping without dreams. I fear what her dreams might be like, with such calm, terrible memories to grind them in. She has not been so calm within my seeing since the sunset. Then for a while there came over her a face of repose, which was like spring after the blast of March. I thought at the time that it was the softness of the red sunset on her face, but somehow now I think that it had a deeper meaning. I am not sleepy myself, though I am weary to death. However, I must try to sleep, for there is tomorrow to think of, and there is no rest for me until later. I must have fallen asleep, for I was awakened by Mina, who was sitting up in the bed with a startled look on her face. I could see easily, for we did not leave the room in darkness. She had placed a warning hand over my mouth, and now she whispered into my ear. "Hush! There's someone in the corridor." I got up swiftly and, crossing the room, gently opened the door. Just outside, stretched out on a mattress, lay Mr. Morris, wide awake. He raised a warning hand for silence as he whispered to me. "Hush! You'll go back to bed. It's all right. One of us here will be here all night. We don't mean to take any chances." His look and gesture forbade discussion, so I came back and told Mina. She sighed, and was positively a shadow of a smile stole over her poor, pale face as she put her arms around me and said softly, "Oh, thank God for good, brave men." With a sigh, she sank back to sleep. I write this now, as I am not sleepy, though I must try again. 4th of October, morning. Once again during the night I was awakened by Mina. This time we had had a good sleep, for the gray of the coming dawn was making the windows into sharp oblongs, and the gas flame was like a speck rather than a disk of light. She said to me hurriedly, "Go call the professor. I want to see him at once." "Why?" I asked. "I have an idea. I suppose it must have come to me in the night and matured without my knowing it. He must hypnotize me before the dawn, and then I shall be able to speak. Go quick, dearest. The time is getting close." I went to the door. Dr. Seward was resting on the mattress, and seeing me, he sprang to his feet. "Is anything wrong?" he asked me in alarm. "No," I replied, "but Mina wants to see Dr. Van Helsing at once." "I will go," he said, and hurried to the professor's room. 2 or 3 minutes later, Van Helsing was in the room in his dressing gown, and Mr. Morris and Lord Godalming were with Dr. Seward at the door asking questions. The professor saw Mina smile, a positive smile, ousted the anxiety of his face. He rubbed his hands and said,
"Oh, my dear Madam Mina, this is indeed a change. See, friend Jonathan, we have got our dear Madam Mina, as of old, back to us today."
Then turning to her, he said cheerfully,
"And what am I to do for you? For at this hour you do not want me for nothings."
"I want you to hypnotize me," she said. "Do it before the dawn, for I feel that I can speak, and speak freely. Be quick, for the time is short." Without a word, he motioned her to sit up in bed. Looking fixedly at her, he commenced to make passes in front of her, from the top of her head downward, with each hand in turn. Mina gazing at him fixedly for a few minutes, during which my own heart beat like a trip hammer, for I felt that some crisis was at hand. Gradually her eyes closed, and she sat, stock still. Only by the gentle heaving of her bosom one could know that she was still alive. The professor made a few more passes and then stopped. I could see that his forehead was covered with great beads of perspiration. Mina opened her eyes, but she did not seem the same woman. There was a faraway look in her eyes, and her voice had a sad dreaminess which was new to me. Raising his hand to impose silence, the professor motioned to me to bring the others in. They came on tiptoe, closing the door behind them, and stood in front of the bed looking on. Mina appeared not to see them. The stillness was broken as Van Helsing's voice, repeating a low, slow tone, which would not break the current of her thoughts.
"Where are you?"
The answer came in a natural way. "I do not know. Sleep has no place it can call its own." For several minutes there was silence. Mina sat rigid, and the professor stood staring at her fixedly. The rest of us hardly dared to breathe. The room was growing lighter, without making his eyes from Mina's face. Dr. Van Helsing motioned me to pull up the blind. I did so, and the day seemed just upon us. The red streak shot up, and the rosy light seemed to diffuse itself in the door. And the instant the professor spoke again.
"Where are you now?"
The answer came dreamily, but with intention. It was as though she were interpreting something. I have heard her use the same tone when reading her notes. "I do not know. It is all strange to me."
"What do you see?"
"I can see nothing. It is all dark."
"What do you hear?"
I could detect the strain in the professor's patient voice. "The lapping of water. It is gurgling by. The little waves leap. I can hear them on the outside."
"Then you are on a ship?"
We all looked at each other, trying to glean something from one or the other. We were afraid to think. The answer came too quick. "Oh, yes."
"What else do you hear?"
The sound of men stamping overhead as they run about. There is a creaking of a chain, and a loud tinkle of a check when the capstan fails to wrench.
"What are you doing?"
I am still, oh, so still. It is like death. The voice faded away into a deep breath of a sleeping one. The eyes closed again. By this time the sun had risen, and we were all in the full light of day. Van Helsing placed his eyes on Mina's shoulder and laid her head down softly on her pillow. She lay like a sleeping child for a few moments, and then, with a long sigh, awoke, stared in wonder to see us all around her. "Have I been talking in my sleep?" was all she said. She seemed, however, to know the situation without telling. Though she was eager to know what she had told, the professor repeated the conversation, and she said, "There's not a moment to lose. It may not be too late." Mr. Morris and Lord Godalming started for the door, but the professor's calm voice called them back.
"Stay, my friends. That ship, wherever it is, was weighing anchor while she spoke. There are many ships weighing anchor at the moment in your great port of London. Which of them is it that you seek? God be thanked that we have once again a clear clue, though whither it may lead us to we do not know. We have been blind somewhat, blind after the manner of men. Since when we can look back, we see what we have seen looking forward. Alas, but the sentence is a puddle, is it not? We can know what it was in the Count's mind when he seized the money, though Jonathan's so fierce knife put him in danger that even he dread. He meant escape. Hear me, escape! He saw that but London was no place for him, and have take the last earth-box to board a ship, and leave the land. He think to escape, but no, we follow him. Tally-ho! As friend Arthur would say when he has put the red frock. Our old fox is wily, oh, so wily, and we must follow with wile. I too am wily, and I think his mind in a little. And meantime we may rest in peace, for there are waters between us which he do not want to pass, and which he do not, if he could, unless his ship were to touch the land. And then, only then, at full or slack tide. See, the sun is just rose, and all day to sunset is to us. Let us take bath and dress, and have breakfast which we will need, and which we can eat comfortable, since he be not on the same land with us."
Mina looked at him appealingly, and then she asked, "But why need we seek him further when he has gone away from us?" He took her hand and patted it as he replied,
"Ask me nothings yet. When we have breakfast, then I will answer all questions."
He would say no more, and we separated to dress. After breakfast, Mina repeated her question. He looked at her gravely for a minute, and said sorrowfully,
"Because, my dear, dear Madam Mina, now more than ever we must be found him, if we have not followed him to the jaws of hell."
She grew paler as she asked firmly, "Why?"
"Because," he answered solemnly, he can live for centuries, but you are a mortal woman. Time is now to be dreaded, since once he put that mark upon your throat."
I was just in time to catch her as she fell forward in a faint. Chapter 24. Dr. Seward's Phonograph Diary. Spoken by Van Helsing.
"This to Jonathan Harker. You are to stay with your dear Madam Mina. We shall go to make our search, if I can call it so, for it is not search but knowing, and we seek contamination only. But do you stay and take care of her today. This is your best and most holiest office. This day nothing can find him here. Let me tell you that you will know what's before known already, for I have told them. He, our enemy, have gone away. We have gone back to his castle in Transylvania. I know it so well, if a great hand of fire wrote it on the wall. He have prepared for this in some way. That last earth-box was ready to ship somewhere. For this he took the money. For this he hurried to the last, lest we catch him before the sun go down. If this was last hope, save that he might hide in the tomb, that he think poor Miss Lucy, being as he thought like him, keep open to him. But there was not time. When that fail, he make straight for his last resource, his last earth box. I might say I wish I had double Western thigh. He is clever, oh, so clever. I know that his game here was finished, and so he decide to go back home. He find ship going by the route he came, and he go on it. We go off now to find what ship, and whither bound. When we have discovered that, we come back and tell you all. Then we will comfort you and poor Madam Mina with new hope. For it will be hope when you think it all over, that all is not lost. This very creature that we pursue, he take hundreds of years to get so far as London, and yet in one day, when we know of his disposal, we drive him out. He is finite, though he is powerful to do much harm and suffers not as we do. But we are strong, each in our purpose, and we are all more strong together. Take heart afresh, dear husband of Madam Mina. This battle is but begun, and in the end we shall win. So sure as that God sits high to watch over his children, therefore be much comfort till we return. Van Helsing.
Jonathan Harker's Journal, 4th October. When I read to Mina Van Helsing's message in the phonograph, the poor girl brightened up considerably. Already the certainty that the Count is out of the country has given her comfort, and comfort is strength for her. For my own part, now that this horrible danger is not face to face with us, it seems almost impossible to believe in it. Even my own terrible experiences in Castle Dracula seem like a long-forgotten dream. Here in the crisp autumn air and the bright sunlight. Alas, how can I disbelieve? In the midst of my thought, my eye fell on the red scar on my poor darling's white forehead. Whilst that lasts, there can be no disbelief, and afterwards the very memory of it will keep faith crystal clear. Mina and I fear to be idle, so we have been over the diaries again and again. Somehow, although the reality seems greater each time, the pain and the fear seem less. There is something of guiding purpose manifest throughout, which is comforting. Mina says that perhaps we are the instruments of the ultimate good. It may be. I shall try to think as she does. We have never spoken to each other yet as of the future. It is better to wait till we see the professor and the others after their investigations. The day is running by more quickly than I ever thought a day could run for me again. It is now 3 o'clock. Mina Harker's Journal, 5th October, 5 p.m. Our meeting for report. Present, Professor Van Helsing, Lord Godalming, Dr. Seward, Mr. Quincy Morris, Jonathan Harker, and Mina Harker. Dr. Van Helsing describes what steps were taken during the day to discover what boat and whither bound Count Dracula made his escape.
I knew that he wanted to get back to Transylvania. I felt sure that he must go by the Danube mouth, or by somewhere in the Black Sea, since that be the way he came. It was a dreary blank that was before us. Omne ignotumum pro magnificum. And so the heavy hearts we start to find what ships leave for the Black Sea at last night. He was in a sailing ship, since Madam Mina sets. Tell of sails being set. These not so important in the hour of the list of the shopping of the times. And so we go by suggestion of Lord Godalming to your Lloyd's, which are notes of all ships' sail, however so small. There we find the only one Black Sea-bound ship. We go to the tide. This is the Tsarina Catherine, and she set sail from Doolittle's wharf at Varna, and thence on to the other parts up the Danube. So, said I, this is the ship whereupon is the Count. So off we go to Doolittle's wharf, where we find a man in the office of wood so small that a man looked bigger than the office. From him we inquire the goings of the Tsarina Catherine. He swore much and red-faced with a loud voice, but he a good fellow the same. And when Quincy gave him something from his pockets which crackled when he rolled it up, he put it into a small bag which he have laid deep in his clothing. He's still a better fellow, and humble servant to us. He come with us, and ask many men who are rough and hot. These be better fellows too, when they too have been no more thirsty. They say much of blood and bloom and others which I comprehend not, though I guess what they mean. But nevertheless they tell us all things which we want to know. They make it known to us that among men, how last afternoon about 5 o'clock come a man so hurry, tall, thin, and pale, with high nose and teeth so white, and his eyes seem to be burning, that he be in all black, except that he have a hat of straw which suit him not for the time. That he scatter his money in making quick inquiry as to what ship sail for the Black Sea, and for where. Some took him to the office, and then to the ship, where he got not on board but halt at the shore end of the gangplank, and asked the captain to come to him. The captain come when told, and he tell him he will pay well, though he swear much at the first he agreed the term. Then the trim man go, and someone tell him where horse and cart can be hired. He go there, and soon again himself driving the cart, on which a great box. This he himself lifts down, though it takes several to put it in the truck of the ship. He give much talk to captain as to how and where his box is to be placed, but the captain not like it, and swear at him in many tongues, and tell him that if he like it he can come and see where it shall be. But he say no, that he come not yet, for that he have much to do. Whereupon the captain tell him that he had better be quick with blood, for that the ship will leave place of blood before the turn of the tide. With blood. What's blood? Then the thin man smile, and say of course he must go, and think he fit. Then he will be surprised if he goes quite so soon. The captain swears again, polyglot, and thin man make him a bow, and thank him, and say that he will be so far intrude to his kindness as to come aboard before sailing. Final the captain, more red than ever, and in more tongues, tell him that he doesn't want no Frenchman with bloom upon them, and also with blood in his ship, with blood on her also. And so, after saying there might be at close hand a stop where he might purchase ship forms, he departed. No one knew where he went, or bloomin' well cared, as they said, for they had something else to think of, with the blood again. For it soon became apparent to all that the Tsarina Catherine would not sail as expected. The thin mist began to creep up the river, and it grew and grew. Soon a dense fog. He must have got off by himself, for none noticed him. Polyglot, very polyglot. Polyglot with bloom and blood, but he could do nothing. The water rose and rose, and he began to fear that he might lose the tide altogether. He was then in no friendly mood, and when full tide the thin man came up to the gangplank again and asked to see where the box had been stowed. Then the captain replied that he wished that he and his box, old and as much bloom and blood, were in hell. But the thin man did not offend, and went down with the mates and saw where it had been placed, and came up and stood along the deck in the fog. He must have come off by himself, for none noticed him. Indeed, they had not thought of him, and for soon the fog began to melt away, and all was clear again. My friends of the thirst and the language that was of bloom and blood laughed, as they told how the man's swears exceeded even the usual polyglot, and was more often full of picturesque on when questioning other mariners who were in movement up and down the river on that hour. They found the few of them had seen any fog at all, except where it had lay around the wharf. However, the ship went out in the ebb tide, and was doubtless by morning far down the river mouth. She was by then, when they told us, well out to sea. And so, my dear Madam Mina, it is that we have to rest for a time, for our enemy is on the sea, with the fog at his command, on his way to the Danube mouth. To sail a ship takes time, she never go quick, and when we start to go we on land more quick. We meet him there. Our best hope is to come on him when the box between sunrise and sunset, for then he can make no struggle, and we may deal with him as we should. There are days for us, in which we make ready our plan. We know all about where he go, for we have seen the ownership of the ship, who have shown us invoices and all papers that can be. The box we seek is to be landed in Varna, and to be given to an agent, one Rissix, who will be there present as credentials, and so our merchant friend will have done his part. When he asks if there be any wrong, for that so he can telegraph and have make inquiry at Varna and say no. For what is to be done if not police for the customs? It must be done by us alone and in our own way.
When Van Helsing was done speaking, I asked him if he were certain that the Count had remained aboard the ship. He replied,
We have the best proof that your own evidence when the hypnotic trance this morning.
I asked him again if it was really necessary they should pursue the Count, for I dread Jonathan leaving me, and I know that he would surely go off if the others went. He answered in growing passion, at first quietly. As he went on, however, he grew more angry and more forceful, till in the end we could not but see wherein was at least some of the personal dominance which made him so long a master amongst men.
Yes, it is necessary. Necessary. Necessary! For your sake in the first, and then for the sake of humanity. This monster has done much harm already. In the narrow scope where he find himself, and in the short time when as yet he has only the body groping in so small measure in the darkness and not knowing. All this have I told these others. You, my dear Madam Mina, will learn it by the phonograph of my dear friend John, or that of your husband. I have told them how the measure of leaving how its own barren land, buried of peoples, and coming to a new land where life and man teems till they are like the multitude of standing corn where the work of centuries. Or another of the undead like him try to do what he has done, perhaps all the centuries of the world that have been, or that will be, could not aid him. With this one, all the forces of nature are that of the occult, and deep and strong must have forced together in some wondrous way. The very place where he have been alive, undead for all these centuries, is full of strangeness in a geologic and chemical world. There are deep caverns and fissures that none reach and know whither. There have been volcanoes, some of whose openings still send the waters with strange properties, and gases that kill and makes the mist vivify. Doubtless there is something magnetic and electric in all some of the combinations of the occult forces at work for physical life in a strange place, and in himself were from the first great qualities. In a hard and warlike time he was celebrate that he have more iron nerve, more subtle brain, and more braver heart than any man. In him some vital principle have in some strange ways found their utmost, and as his body keep strong and grow and thrive, so his brain grow too. All this without that diabolical aid which is surely to him, for it have to yield to the powers that come from and are symbolic of good. And now this is what he is to us. He have infect you. Oh, forgive me, my dear, that I must say such, but it is for good of you that I speak. He infect you in such ways that even if he do not know more, you have only to live in your way, old, sweet way, and in time death, which is man's common lot with God's sanction, shall make you like him. This must not be. We have sworn together that it must not. Thus are the ministers of God's own wish, that the world, and men for whom his Son died, will not be given over to monsters, whose very existence would defame him. He have allowed us to redeem one soul already, and we go out as old knights of the cross to redeem more. Like them, we shall travel towards the sunrise, and like them, if we fall to good cause. He paused, and it said, But will not the Count take this rebuff wisely? Since she has been driven from England, will he not avoid it, as a tiger does the village from which he was once hunted? Ah, he said, your simile to the tiger is good for me. I shall adopt him. You're a man-eater, as they of India call the tiger who has once tasted blood of the human. Care no more for other prey, but prowl unceasingly till he get him. And this that we hunts from our village is a tiger, too, a man-eater, and will never cease to prowl. Nay, in himself he is not one to retire or stay afar. In his living life, he go over the Turkey frontier and attack his enemy on his own ground. He be beaten back, but did he stay? No. He come again and again and again. Look at his persistence and endurance. With a child brain that was to him have long since conceived the idea of coming to a great city. What does he do? He find out a place of all the world most promise for him. When he deliberately sets himself down to prepare for his task, he find in patience just how is his strength, and what are his powers. He study new tongues. He learn new social life, new environment of old ways. The politic, the law, the finance, the science, the habit of the new land, the new people who have come to be since he was. A glimpse that he have had, whet his appetite only, to keen his desire. Nay, it help him to grow as to his brain, for all he proved to himself how right he was at the first of his surmises. He have done this alone, all alone, from a ruined tomb to a forgotten land. What more may he not do when the greater world of thoughts is open to him? That he can smile at death as we know him, who can flourish in the midst of diseases that kill off whole peoples. Oh, if such a one was to come from God, and not the devil, what a force for good he might not be in this old world of ours. But we are pledged to set the world free. Our toil must be in silence, and our efforts all in secret. For in his enlightened age, when men believe not even what they see, the doubting of wise men would be the greatest strength. It would be at once his death and his armor, and his weapon to destroy us, his enemies, who are willing to peril even our own souls for the safety of one we love, for the good of mankind, and for the honor and glory of God. After general discussion, it was determined that for tonight nothing be definitely settled. That we should all sleep on the facts and try to think of the proper conclusions. Tomorrow at breakfast we are to meet again,
And after our conclusions known to one another, we shall decide on some course of action. I feel a wonderful peace and rest tonight. It is as if some haunting presence were removed from me. Perhaps. My surprise was not finished. It could not be, for I caught sight of the mirror and the red mark upon my forehead, and I knew I was still unclean. Let's see. Seems a long way to go. Dr. Seward's Diary, 5th October. We all rose early, and I think that sleep did much for each of us. When we met at early breakfast, there was more general cheerfulness than any of us has had or ever expected to experience again. It was really wonderful how much resilience there is in human nature, letting any obstructing cause, no matter what, be removed in any way, even by death, and we fly back to the first principles of hope and enjoyment. More than once, as we sat around the table, my eyes opened in wonder whether the whole of the past few days had not been a dream. It was only when I caught sight of the red blotch on Miss Harker's forehead that I was brought back to the reality. Even now, when I am gravely resolving the matter, it is almost impossible to realize that the cause of all our trouble is still existent. Even Mrs. Harker seems to lose sight of her trouble from the whole spells. It is only now and again, when something recalls it to her mind, and she thinks of that terrible scar. We are to meet here in the study in half an hour and decide on our course of action. I can only see one immediate difficulty. I know that by instinct rather than reason, we all shall have to speak frankly, and yet I fear in the poor, mysterious way Miss Harker's tongue is tied. I know that she forms conclusions of her own, and from all that has been I can guess how brilliant and how true they must be, but she will not, or cannot, give them utterance. I have mentioned this to Van Helsing, and he and I are to talk it over when we are alone. I suppose it is some of that horrid poison which has gotten into her veins beginning to work. The Count had his own purposes when he gave her what Van Helsing called the vampire's baptism of blood. Well, it may be a poison that distills itself out of good things, in an age of the existence of platonies. A mystery we should not wonder at anything. I know one thing, that if my instincts be true regarding poor Miss Harker's silences, then there is a terrible difficulty, an unknown danger, in the work before us. The same power that compels her silence may compel her speech. I dare not think further, for so I should, my thoughts dishonor the noble woman. Van Helsing is coming to my study a little before the others. I shall try to open the subject with him. Later. When the professor came in, we talked about the state of things. I could see that he had something on his mind which he wanted to say, but felt some hesitancy about broaching the subject. After beating about the bush a little, he said suddenly, "Friend John, there is something that you and I must talk about alone. Just at the first time, at any rate. Later we may have to take the others into our confidences." Then he stopped, so I waited. He went on. "Madam Mina, our poor dear Madam Mina, is changing." A cold shiver ran through me to find my worst fears were endorsed. Van Helsing continued. "With the sad experience of Miss Lucy, we must this time be warned before things go too far. Our task is now, in reality, more difficult than ever, and this new trouble makes every hour of our direst importance. I can see the characteristics of the vampire coming to her face. It is now but very, very slight, but it is to be seen if we have eyes to notice without to prejudge.
Her teeth are some sharper, and at times her eyes are more hard. But these are not all. There is to her the silence now often, and so it was with Miss Lucy. She did not speak, even when she wrote that which she wished to be known later. Now my fear is this. If it can be that she can, by our hypnotic trance, tell what the Count see and hear, is it not more true that he who have hypnotized her first, who have drunk of her very blood to make her drink of his, should, if he will, compel her mind to disclose to him that which she know?
I nodded acquiescence. He went on.
Then what we must do to prevent this, we must keep her ignorant of our intent, and she cannot tell what she know now. This is a painful task. Oh, so painful that it heart-sink me to think it. But it must be. When today we meet, I must tell her the reason for which we will not speak, and she will not know more of our counsel, but be simply guarded by us.
He wiped his forehead, which had broken out in the profuse perspiration at the thought of the pain which he might have to inflict on poor soul already so tortured. I knew that it must be some sort of comfort to him that if I told him that I had also come to the same conclusion, for at any rate it would take away the pain of doubt, I told him that the effect was as I expected. It is now close to the time of our general gathering. Van Helsing has gone away to prepare for the meeting, and his pitiful part of it. I really believe his purpose is to be able to pray alone. Later. At the very outset of our meeting, a great personal relief was experienced by both Van Helsing and myself. Mrs. Harker had sent a message by her husband to say that she would not join us at present, as she thought it better that we should be free to discuss our movements without her presence to embarrass us. The professor and I looked at each other for an instant, and somehow we both seemed relieved. For my own part, I thought that if Mrs. Harker realized the danger herself, it was much pain as well as much danger averted. Under the circumstances, we agreed, by a questioning look and another, a finger on lip, and a preserved silence of our suspicions until we should not be able to confer alone. We went at once into our plan of campaign. Van Helsing roughly put the facts before us.
The Tsarina Catherine left the Thames yesterday morning. It will take her at the quickest speed as she has ever made at least 3 weeks to reach Varna. But we can travel overland to the same place in 3 days. Now, if we allow for 2 days less for the ship's voyage, owing to such weather influences as we know the Count can bring to bear, and if we allow a whole day and night for any delays which may occur to us, then we have a margin of nearly 2 weeks. Thus, in order to be quite safe, we must leave here on the 17th at the latest. Then we shall be at any rate in Varna a day before the ship arrives, and able to make such preparations as will be necessary. Of course, we shall go unarmed, armed against evil things, spiritually as well as physically,
Quincy Morris added. I understand the Count comes from a wolf country, and it may be that we get a great deal there before us. I propose we add Winchesters to our armament. I have a kind of belief in a Winchester when there is any trouble of that sort around. Do you remember, Art, when we had that pack of us at Tolpasek? What wouldn't we have given to have a piece of the repeater at pence?
Good, said Van Helsing. Winchesters it shall be. Quincy's head is level at all times, and most so when there was a hunt. though my metaphor would be more dishonor to science than wolves to be of any danger to man. In the meantime, we can do nothing here, and as I think that Varna is not familiar to any of us, why not go there more soon? It is a long to wait there. Tonight and tomorrow we can get ready, and then, if all be well, we four can set out on our journey. Winchesters against Dracula. Imagine that. We four, said Harker interrogatively, looking from one to another. Of course, answered the professor quickly. You must remain to take care of your sweet wife. Harker was silent for a while, and then said in a hollow voice, Let us talk of that part in the morning. I want to consult with Mina. I thought that now was the time to Van Helsing to warn him not to disclose our plans to her, but he took no notice. I looked at him significantly and coughed. For answer, he put his finger in his lip and turned away. Quincy is the Texan in the group. Jonathan Harker's Journal, 5th October, afternoon. For some time after our meeting this morning, I could not think. The new phrases of things leave my mind in a state of wonder which allows no room for active thought. Mina's determination not to take any part of the disclosure has set me thinking. As I could not argue the matter with her, I could only guess. I am as far as ever from a solution now. Now, the way the others received it, too, puzzled me. The last time we talked of the subject, we agreed that there was not to be any more concealment of anything among us. Mina is sleeping now, calmly and sweetly, like a little child. Her lips have curved, and her face beams of happiness. Thank God there's such moments still in her. Later. How strange it is. I sat watching Mina's happy sleep, and came as near as happy myself as I suppose I shall ever be. As the evening drew on, the earth took its shadows from the sun, sinking lower, and the silence of the room grew more and more solemn to me. At once Mina opened her eyes, and looking at me tenderly said, Jonathan, I want you to promise me something on your word of honor. A promise made to me, but made wholly in God's hearing, and not to be broken though I should go down on my knees and implore you with bitter tears. Quick, you must make it to me at once. Mina, I said, a promise like that I cannot make at once. I may have no right to make it. But, dear one, she said, with such a spiritual intensity in her eyes, like the pole stars, it is I who wish it, and it is not for myself. You can ask Dr. Van Helsing if I am not right. If he disagrees, you may do as you will. Nay, more. If you not agree later, you are absorbed by the promise. I promise, I said, and for the moment she looked supremely happy, though to me all happiness for her was denied by the red scar on her forehead. She said, Promise me that you will not tell me anything of the plans formed by the campaign against the Count. Not by word, or inference, or implication, not at any time whilst this remains to me. And she solemnly pointed at the scar. I saw that she was in earnest, and said solemnly, I promise. And as I said it, I felt at the instant the door had been shut between us. Later, midnight. Mina has been bright and cheerful all the evening, so much so that the rest seemed to take courage, as if infected somewhat by her gaiety. As a result, even I myself felt as if the pall of gloom which weighs on us were somewhat lifted. We all retired early. Mina is now sleeping like a little child. It is a wonderful thing that her facility of sleep remains in her in the midst of this terrible trouble. Thank God for it, for then at least she can forget her care. Perhaps her example may affect me as the gaiety did tonight. I shall try. Oh, for a dreamless sleep. 6th October. Another surprise.
Mina woke me early, about the same time as yesterday, and asked me to bring Dr. Van Helsing. I thought that it was another occasion for hypnotism, and without question went for the professor. He had evidently expected some such call, for I found him dressed in his room. His door was ajar, so that he could hear the opening of the door of the room. He came at once, and he passed into the room and asked Mina if the others might come too. No, she replied simply. It will not be necessary. You can tell them just as well. I must go with you on your journey. Dr. Van Helsing was startled as I was. After a moment's pause, he asked, But why? You must take me with you. I'm safer with you, and you shall be safer too. But why, dear Madam Mina? You know that your safety is our solemnest duty. We go into danger to which you are, or may be, more liable than any of us from harm, from circumstances of things that might have been. He paused, embarrassed. As she replied, she raised a finger and pointed at her forehead. I know. That is why I must go. I can tell you now, whilst the sun is coming up, I may not be able again. I know that when the Count wills me, I must go. I know that if he tells me to come in secret, I must come by wile, by any device to hoodwink even Jonathan. God saw the look that she turned me as she spoke. If there was to be indeed a recording angel, that look is noted on her everlasting honor. I could only clasp her hands. I could not speak. My emotion was too great for even the relief of tears. She went on. You are men brave and strong. You are strong in your numbers, for you can defy that which would break down the human endurance of one who had gone to guard alone. Besides, I may be of some service, since you can hypnotize me and I can learn which I know not myself. Dr. Van Helsing said gravely. Madam Mina, you are, as always, most wise. You shall continue and come with us, and together we shall do that which we go forth to achieve. When he had spoken, Mina's long spell of silence made me look at her. She had fallen back on her pillow asleep. She did not even wake when I had pulled up the blind and let the sunlight which fled the room. Van Helsing motioned to me to come with him quietly. We went to his room, and in a minute Lord Godalming, Dr. Seward, and Mr. Morris were also with us. He told them what Mina had said, and went on. In the morning we shall leave for Varna. We have now a deal with the new factor, Madam Mina. But her soul is true. It is her in agony to tell us so much that she has done, but is most right. We are warned in time. There must be no chance lost, and in Varna we must be ready to act the instant when the ship arrives. What shall we do exactly? Asked Morris laconically. The professor paused before replying. We shall at first board that ship. Then, when we have identified the box, we shall place a branch of wild rose on it. This we shall fasten, for when it is there none can emerge. So at least says the superstition. And to superstition we must trust at the first. It was man's faith in the early earth, and have its root in faith still. Then, when we get the opportunity that we seek, when none are near to see, we shall open the box, and all will be well. I shall not wait for any opportunity, said Morse. When I see the box, I shall open it and destroy the monster. Though there were 1,000 men looking on, and if I be wiped out for it the next moment. I grasped his hand instinctively, and found it as firm as a piece of steel. I think he understood my look. I hope he did.
Good boy, said Dr. Van Helsing. Brave boy. Quincy is all man. God bless him for it. My child, believe me, none of us shall lag behind or pause from any fear. But I do say what we must do. But indeed, we cannot say what we shall do. There are so many things which may happen, and their ways and their ends are so various that until the moment we may not say. We shall be armed in all ways, and when the time for the end is come, our effort shall not be in lack. Now let us put today all our affairs in order. Let all things for which we touch on others dear to us, and who on us depend, be complete, for none of us can tell what, or when, or how the end may be. As for me, my own affairs are regulate, and as I have nothing else to do, I shall go make arrangements for the travel. I shall have the tickets, and so forth on our journey.
There was nothing further to be said, and we parted. I shall now settle up my affairs on earth and be ready for whatever may come. Later is all done. My will is made and all complete. Mina, if she survive, is my sole heir. It should not, if it should not be so, and the others who have been so good to us will have the remainder. It is now drawing towards sunset. Mina's uneasiness calls my attention to it. I am sure that there is something on her mind which the time of exact sunset will reveal. The occasions are becoming harrowing at times, for each sunrise and sunset opens up some new danger, some new pain, which, however may in God's will be means to the good end. I write all of these things in the diary, since my darlings must not hear them now. But if it may be that she can see them some day, they will be ready. She's calling me.